La doctora Susan Amat es directora de GEM, Accelerates at Global Entrepreneurship, emprendedora en serie, CEO y fundadora de Venture Hive, una incubadora y aceleradora establecida en Miami. Creadora y directora general de Launchpad, modelo educacional de emprendimiento en Estados Unidos. Ha trabajado con el Departamento de Estado de USA y el Banco Mundial. Susan es miembro del directorio de STEM en Miami-Dade County Public School. Conferencista internacional en temas de emprendimiento y educación. Fue nombrada Champion of Change en la Casa Blanca. Es graduada de su doctorado de la Universidad de Miami. Los invito a recibir con un cálido aplauso a Susan Amat, quien abordará el tema métricas para evaluar el desarrollo empresarial. Welcome to Susan Amat.
So I'm going to talk about metrics. So this is going to get very nerdy very fast. Be prepared. So I am the Vice President for Education for GEN, which is the Global Entrepreneurship Network. And I started something with them last year called GEN Accelerates, because we work all over the world, and wherever we go, there are people who want to do huge ecosystem building projects, but really don't have the skill set or capacity or understand how to measure exactly what's working and not working in their programs. So what I'm going to talk about today, we're going to go through a case study of how to actually understand and unpack all of the different levels of metrics you can do in an accelerator. But that's just one of 30-some different case studies that we could go through in looking at how entrepreneurship should be measured and evaluated to assess actual ROI on projects. You have the deck, right? Well, I'll just start talking. The second slide, it's kind of giving a perspective on my background so you understand why we do the things we do. So I actually dropped out of high school when I was 16 because I had my own business, and I sold it when I was 25. So when you think like an entrepreneur from the beginning, the way you evaluate what the entrepreneur's needs are a little bit different. Because as I was building my business, I was traveling all over the world, and I would find these awesome mentors who all seemed amazing, and they would tell me what I should be doing, but they weren't helping me become the person who could execute the things I wanted to do. And so when I sold my business, I went to college, and I did my undergrad, and I started inventing healthcare products, and I did my MBA, and then I ended up doing a PhD because the doctors were not being nice to a non-doctor. You know how that is. So the fascinating thing going through that journey has been understanding how to look at an entrepreneur, because when you speak to entrepreneurs, what do you think they all say they need to be successful? All of them, and especially the younger ones. They think money is the problem. Money is never the problem. Financing is, once you figure out your business model, once you understand what it is you're trying to accomplish, no problem. The next few years, I was very lucky to be able to set up the Launchpad at the University of Miami, which was replicated all over the world as Blackstone Launchpads. And there, the goal was really to change the way universities developed entrepreneurs with the data to track what was working on individual and company levels. I then went on to start Venture Hive, which was an accelerator for economic development. And this is where it really got interesting, because at that point, when you think about most entrepreneurship programs, they are to build good companies, right? Companies that will grow and create jobs if it's an economic development focused program, companies that will return a good return to investors. But when you are focused on doing an economic development program, yes, jobs, but it's also very different than the normal accelerator model, because you're trying to recruit individuals and companies that will stay in a region. And the normal accelerator model is all about having an equity piece in a company, and the company works with you for 3 months, and then typically leaves. So it's a really big challenge to have that different storyline of recruiting companies to be able to stay in a region and contribute to society there, versus I want equity in the company, and then it really doesn't matter where they end up going, because yay! Gracias! Okay, so here's me. So we're going to talk about problems and metrics design. Okay, and then my clicker will work. Bam! It's so funny because like we work with these crazy huge technology businesses doing IoT for some of the biggest corporates in the world, doing internet, just really, really cool hardware and software and 5G, and then the simplest things are always what goes wrong. Yay! Gracias. Okay, so after I started building out the launch pads, this is where it got really fun because I ended up being a much bigger nerd than I ever thought I was. I was very cool when I was young, and I became more and more nerdy. So I ended up starting to do measurement and evaluation for the Kauffman Foundation and the World Bank and the State Department. So I would go all over the world and look at corporate programs or government programs or university programs to assess return on investment. So a lot of these programs, they were spending tens of millions of dollars, and there wasn't data to see what was working and not working. They weren't tracking longitudinally, which means over a long period of time, exactly what was working. So they would have sometimes okay data about what was happening in the program, but you didn't understand the long-term effects. So I became obsessed with that. And then I started Venture Hive, and then we started building software to track data. That's how bad it is. When you become a tech entrepreneur to track data, that's like the worst. Okay. And then Global Entrepreneurship Network, yay. So let's talk about this. So you guys have heard of Global Entrepreneurship Week, right? It's kind of a big thing. Okay, that's fine. It's awesome. 170 countries, we have 10 to 15 million participants every year. And that's how it all started. But then we started doing research, and I got involved with Jen year one, 2008, doing Global Entrepreneurship Week. And since then, we started Global Business Angels Network and the Global Research, GERN, Global Entrepreneurship Research Network. And so we work all over the world. We also have 70 country partners, including in Ecuador, where they do all kinds of organizational things. And then I get to make sure they're collecting good data so that when we do our ecosystem reports and our kind of state of entrepreneurship globally, we actually have valid data, which we'll talk about now. So when we talk to entrepreneurs, this is usually the biggest problem. How many of you are entrepreneurs? 0? 1. There's one entrepreneur in this whole room. Who thinks they want to eventually be an entrepreneur? Okay, we're up to 3. Yay! Oh, why are you scared? This is like, yeah! Even my 7-year-old who's here, if you want to talk nerdy, you have to meet him. He's like, I need to be an entrepreneur. I don't want somebody telling me what to do. Entrepreneurship is this wonderful thing of freedom, but it's also more work than any job. So when you start talking to entrepreneurs about why they should give you data, it's a really hard conversation. Because what's their job? Their job isn't to help you understand entrepreneurs. Their job is to build a good company and solve a customer problem, most importantly. Entrepreneurs have 2 jobs. Solve a customer problem, ideally in a repeatable, sustainable way, and make enough money so that they can keep things moving, continue to support customers, continue to pay employees, and most importantly, return a good, have a fair return to investors or whoever is part of their team. It's that simple. So it's very, very hard to convince them that it's good for them to give you the data you need. That's why you have to make sure it's a win-win. I know I can serve entrepreneurs better when they give me data. When it's in a program, I have control, right? Because I can say, well, if you don't give me the data, I'm not going to make sure, you're not going to have a mentoring session, or I'm going to cut you off from this, or I won't give you this opportunity. But when the program is over, is the data I really want. Because if it's a 3 or 6 or 1 year program, the month but the months and years afterwards, that's when I want the data. Because that shows me all of the work we put in matters. And more importantly, and this is where the data, the entrepreneurship data, research is really bad, everyone at this point right now is tracking at the company level. Now, I'm sure you guys have heard the stats that like 90% of startups fail, right? It's a huge problem, and it's actually more, but that's fine. So when a startup fails, then you stop collecting data on the startup, right? It's tracking the individual that's the cool thing to do. Well, from me. It's tracking the individual that actually matters. Because if someone goes in a program and I spent 6 months mentoring them, well, not me, mentoring, coaching, supporting, training, all of this stuff, and then they realize the company won't work, that's a lot of times a big success, right? I'm not saying fail fast is good. I'm saying they have educated themselves to say, you know what? I can't figure out this business model, the timing isn't right, whatever, I'm not going to do that anymore. But that person, all of the education we gave them during that program, what are they going to do next? And sometimes when you track an entire ecosystem and you see that they went to this university and then did this student program and then did this and then did this, where are they actually getting the knowledge to eventually have that successful business? Each of those groups may have data on the teams, but if you're not tracking longitudinally across, you're missing out on really understanding where the true value, where that impact happened, to have them be able to be the leaders of great companies. Does that make sense so far? Sorry. So you have to start out with understanding entrepreneurs don't want to be guinea pigs. I mean, when I was I wouldn't tell anybody what I was doing because it's not their business unless I thought I could get something from them, right? An introduction, help, whatever. But when you're running entrepreneurship programs, if you don't understand what's working and not working, I don't even know why you should say you have a program. Okay, so what metrics matter? There's a lot of metrics you can track. We have like probably 2,500 metrics that are in our database that are appropriate for different types of companies at different types of time, okay? If you're a researcher, you have to understand what story you want to tell in your research. So you're going to track very specific things, and you're tied to protocols of the academy, fine. If you're running a program, or most importantly, if you're an entrepreneur, you need to track the metrics that are going to ensure that your team understands what's important, because if you're not measuring it, it doesn't matter, right? You're not managing it if you're not measuring it. It's that simple. So your team needs to have their own OKRs, their own metrics, which float up to company level metrics. And when you understand what's working and not working across your business, whether it's sales, optimizing efficiencies, productivity levels, margins, whatever those numbers are, if you understand what's important for you to have success, your team then needs to understand what's important for each of them to have success, then you can actually run smoothly. But again, it's about people deciding, here's what's important. So there's not a one-size-fits-all metric. And with programs, again, it depends on the type of program and what it is you're trying to accomplish. And we'll spend a minute on that when I get to the case study. So there's lots of problems in entrepreneurship data. How many of you are entrepreneurship researchers? Okay, so no one? Come on, guys! I'm dying to know who's in this audience if no one's like these big groups of people. One, yay! Okay, so programs aren't incentivized to collect good data. This is like the biggest problem of all. So there are lots of groups who have like networks of programs that they're saying they're collecting data on, but the people who run those programs, it's basically showing why their programs are bad. Because they're not collecting good data. And the way that they're currently being set up, if it's 3 months, and again, depending on the goals of your program, if you're not clear about aligning them to a larger goal, like I run education companies and innovation education. I'm an educator. I care about the education, so I want the data to build better education. I'm incentivized. If I'm a program manager at some accelerator and we just took equity in all of these companies, does it really matter what we're doing well or not if the sales are there and they're getting follow-on investment and there are some exit? Doesn't really matter. So if you're not aligning the reason why the data you need is good for the people who are on staff to do the extra work to collect the data, you're never going to get good data. Most of these programs also, it's all self-report, which, again, I don't know if you've ever heard the saying, fake it till you make it. That is very common with entrepreneurs. So a lot of what they have to do is hype and get people excited when what they're calling a pilot is really, basically some wireframes and a very simple website and everything is manual behind it, okay? So let's just say the data and the openness of what they're willing to share, what reality is versus what sounds good for investors is not that close. So when you then have them self-reporting, you're going to have some issues in getting true quality because they may want to impress people thinking it may lead to something instead of how badly everything is going, because entrepreneurship is the hardest thing in the world. Okay. It's rarely triangulated. Triangulation, and I have a whole slide on this because I just was going to be careful in case there weren't nerdy academics in the room. Triangulated means that I may have an entrepreneur who self-reports, and they say, oh, our sales are this. And then how do we check it? So maybe a program manager is also interviewing them or in a meeting, writing down the data that they reported, and then maybe an investor or somebody on their board, right? So that means there's 3 data sources telling us that it's accurate and valid, okay? It's a lot of work to do that. But if you don't have at least a double level of checking, you're going to end up with poor data. There's no controls for bias and conflicts of interest. So again, if I'm running an accelerator and I want all of you to apply for my accelerator and I report that the companies are not doing as well as I'd like them to, it might mean that less people apply for my accelerator next time. So I have a major conflict of interest there because I need to look good. So even if the companies are saying the right numbers, I have a conflict of interest in what I report into some big study because I can't make it look like my companies don't do as well as the other 50 accelerators that may be trying to get hardware companies or food tech companies or whatever it is. So if you don't have that control for bias or conflict of interest, and most people don't even check if they're conflicted. These are really big problems. And then the baselines typically are just not done. A baseline reading is what you do before any program or training or intervention starts to see where people are, to assess their education, understanding, where they fall on things. If the baseline is not done correctly, there's no way of knowing if you just picked really good companies and then you did a little bit of training and then they're doing awesome. How much of that is attributed to your work versus whoever picked the companies? And if you're, like, I live in Miami. It's a very nice life, I have to tell you. It's easy to attract companies from all over the world to Miami. Very easy. It's Miami. That doesn't mean that my program is awesome. It means that I have an easier time with the location side of attracting companies. But a great program could be in the middle of nowhere, and it's very, very hard for people to attract the level of companies because the location isn't as attractive. So I have to show every day the value of being in my program, right? If I can't look an entrepreneur in the eye and say, here's exactly what you're going to get from my program, you're not going to get a tan or have time at the beach because we're going to be working you to death, That's how I know the value is there, right? Questions here, or can we keep going? All right. So, I'm going to make it very simple for those of you who aren't researchers. There's two types of data. There's quantitative data and there's qualitative data. So quantitative data are the numbers, right? So sales, quantitative, there's numbers. And you can see by percentages really easily what's working and not working. Qualitative data is the descriptive data. And it actually sometimes tells a really rich story because I can get, you still have to group, and it's a lot more work to group and tag qualitative data, but it could be something from awards won, or I mean, that's the simplest thing. Let's just keep it there. So that if they win a whole bunch of awards, that's also sometimes challenging because there are companies who go all over the world who just win awards and they never actually run a company. They're just really good at pitching. That's not entrepreneurship. That's like knowing how to win competitions. Anyway, so these are some key definitions. So if any of you ever want to like go into research, these are the kind of things you're thinking about. It's making sure the content, the data you're collecting actually is measuring what you want it to measure. It's controlling and making sure that there aren't other things that may make the data bad, like somebody trying to impress you by saying, oh, well, I'm more like this, when it's really not the case. Reliability means that the test, no matter who takes it, consistently is measuring the same thing. And then validity is that it's measuring what it's supposed to be measuring. And this is really the key kind of phrase here. A measurement may be reliable but not valid, or valid but not reliable. And you have to have both. Okay, so sorry about this for those of you who already know all this stuff. So triangulation is what I was just talking about briefly, about having tests to make sure that different types of people are checking, and that I may be bragging, we're doing this, and then when I talk to somebody else, I may give them a totally different number. You have to make sure that it's the same. So now we're getting into a case study, and this will actually be fun. So I'm going to go through some key definitions just so we all understand that we're on the same page. So co-working, I'm sure everybody has heard of co-working. That's a space where there's desks that anyone can rent. There's no programming there, okay? Spaces, entrepreneurs rent there, but corporates rent there, and there's no program, they just want a space in like a cool environment, okay? Entrepreneurship does not happen in co-working spaces. Entrepreneurs rent co-working spaces, but programs and data and understanding what's working and not working, that's not happening there, okay? Incubation started out as a university program because there were spin-outs coming, there were companies coming out of university research, and they needed to be by the university, right? So incubators are places typically tied to universities and then governments sometimes, where you can rent space and there's a program of some kind. The programs can range from very, very simple, here's some mentoring and an accountant comes in and a lawyer comes in occasionally, all the way through to very intensive programs. And with incubators, there's like a graduation, which could be at a 2-year or 3-year point. And then those were typically tied to economic development, very much about being near a place or in a place. Pre-acceleration are typically idea stage programs, and typically 12 weeks, where you're testing and validating if there's feasibility of business model and that there's really an opportunity. So you're testing and validating the idea as a product or service and as a company, as a repeatable business model, all right? Those can be anywhere, and again, those are typically more for local type needs. Now, accelerators have been popularized in the last 10 years plus, and those were originally done by funds. So if I have an investment fund, I'm a VC, and I see a lot of companies coming to me trying to get investment. To de-risk that investment, they started building accelerators. Accelerators are typically 12-week programs where a bunch of companies apply. So when we did our first one in 2008, that was a formal program. We got 2,000 applicants for 10 spots. That's crazy. Because for the top 500, they're all pretty good. When you get down to the top 100, you may as well just like pick names out of a hat because they're so good and it's so hard to actually diligence them properly. Diligencing is actually like assessing if they're going to be a good fit, right? And so with an accelerator, the VC has a fund and the goal is to de-risk the investment in 10 at a time. They come into your program, they work with you for 3 months so you're able to take more equity in the company because they're coming to you 3 months. That training is worth sometimes 5, sometimes 10. I've seen people taking 20 and more %, which is insane, but they're very early stage. And that fund is then going to make an investment of anywhere between sometimes 20,000 US, sometimes 100,000, sometimes more, and you're part of their portfolio. So it's a really great win-win, but you can imagine the companies move to wherever that program is. When the 3 months is over, they move to wherever else they're going. And there have been some very questionable accelerators where they move them to a place that's not going to help them get the customers. Because what companies need is access to customers. They need to show a repeatable business model and have revenue by having access to customers. So a good accelerator is very much tied to helping them test and validate to get customers to make revenue. But unfortunately what's happened is accelerators have been to then keep raising money because that's how the VC looks at the world, right? It's the next round. How do we get to the next round? And then they create entrepreneurs who are focused on spending the rest of their lives until they exit fundraising. We've taken a very, very different approach where we are 100% focused on sales because if you have sales and revenue, you can get investors. If you don't have sales and revenue, you shouldn't have a business. Does this all make sense? Great. So, we're going to go through a case study of how do you design good metrics for an acceleration program. Now this is, and I should explain, like we build programs. We're running an internal program for Visa right now, for all over LAC for their employees. We've run those for Walmart and Microsoft all over the world. We do idea level programs in high schools and colleges. We run growth accelerators for companies that already have 10 million in revenue to internationalize. So we run lots of different types of programs. And each of those has different metrics that I care about. Each one has a very different set of metrics. So as we go through this case study, we're going to go through step by step how to think through what kinds of questions you need to ask to understand what metrics matter, okay? And those of you who want to be entrepreneurs, or those of you who just want to be business people and know how to add value to society, which all of us should be doing, it's really thinking about how am I adding value to the company I work for, my school, whatever it is I'm doing, and you can measure it if you want to. It's a lot of work, but it gets really fun, and then you're going to be the person who can ask for the raises. You're going to be the person who can show why you should be promoted because you will have the data. Nobody does anything because you're nice. Have the data to show the value you offer. So, I'm going to start an accelerator. Here are the questions I need to think through. First of all, what are the goals of the program? The goals may be to take equity in 10 companies. It could be economic development. It could be to solve this specific problem in this industry, right? Lots of different types of goals, and sometimes it could be 2 or more. But first you have to define what the goals of the program are because then that kind of puts you on a decision tree to understand what you need to be measuring to see if you did that. Second, target entrepreneurs, companies. So some programs are focused on a type of entrepreneur. We want people who are engineers, who can do these type of things, who are going to make hardware businesses or specific IoT businesses or whatever. Or maybe people who have been in agriculture and they're doing food tech or specific chemicals around solving a problem. So you can focus on individuals being on teams, or you can focus on a certain type or level of company. So again, we ended up kind of grouping the kind of programs we do into 5 different levels. So if it's a company that already has a validated product and revenue of a certain amount, you're going to get those companies, but you have to tell them, hey, we want companies that already have $1 million in revenue for the product sales, not consulting. We want teams that have this composition. The more clear you are about the type of entrepreneur and the type of company, the better your data is going to be. And the more clear the type of programming you do is. Lots of first-time accelerators, they're just like, you know, apply for this program. And then you end up with like 3 companies that are amazing, doing really great work, entrepreneurs with exits. And then people who just finished college who don't really have business experience. And it's very, very hard to run at scale really strong programs when you have that level of diversity in your cohort. It can be done, but you're going to have to do remedial work with a subset and potentially more mentoring with certain people. It can be done, but it's just a lot of extra work. For-profit or nonprofit. So is the program I'm running, is the company under the program a for-profit company or a nonprofit? If it's nonprofit, I already have funding. I probably already have a mandate from whoever my funder is that they care about these specific things. If it's a for-profit, I probably am going to be very, very focused on, number 1, taking equity. Number 2, how do I have other private entities pay me to run similar types of programs? How do I monetize every aspect of what I'm doing, right? That goes back to the funding sources. So if a government paid for this first program, they're going to care about job creation. They're going to care about economic development, the storyline for the city or community that they're doing innovation. But there are some really big conflicts of interest there. So if I'm running an economic development accelerator, the county, the city, really cares about jobs. But if this company in my program is learning how to optimize everything and is super efficient, my good advice to them is not hire more people. My good advice is keep growing your business and keep optimizing your processes so that you can stay as lean as possible. Right there, I'm not doing what my donor cares about, my sponsor cares about. I'm looking out for the entrepreneur. It gets very confusing very, very fast, right? Because I'm going to have to report on job creation numbers to my sponsor, my grantee, but I have to make sure the entrepreneurs are going to stay in business. And if I'm having them hire extra people so I meet my numbers, that's bad for them. They need to hire the least amount of people who are going to do the most amount of stuff to test and validate that model. Conflicts of interest, it's really hard. Okay. Is it tied to an equity fund? This is a very big one. So if my program has a fund and all of these people are in 10 teams and now I have equity in their companies, again, am I advising them for what's best for their businesses, or am I advising them on what's best for my fund? I can't tell you how many times, even people who've graduated from our program, they get really nice offers to be purchased. I don't have equity in their companies. We decided from day 1 we were an education company, and to do what we do with them, we get amazing data, but I don't have equity. So when they come to me for advice, I'm giving them good advice for their futures, not for mine. I'm not thinking about that boat I can buy because of their exit because I own 15% or 10% of the business. Does that make sense? That's a big problem. You have to make sure you get advice from people who are doing it because they care about what's best for you, not because of conflicts of interest. Economic development, I explained. Length of the engagement. Some programs are 3 months, some are 6, some are 12, some are multi-year. So we've set up programs and even application processes. We're running right now something called Entrepreneurship World Cup, where for 3 months, we had 100-some thousand startups apply from 140 countries. So for 3 months, they had access to tons of content to be able to do their application. Because sometimes you get amazing scientists and researchers and technologists who don't know anything about business. And it's very easy to kind of discount them because their applications aren't as good as people who like make business sound awesome, who have no technology. So we designed it to have 3 months of them accessing content and support to be able to do their applications. And then starting in 2 weeks, we have an accelerator for 250 startups from all over the world virtual. Then we have a live program with the top 20, maybe 30, I think. So how long can the program be to actually have the people who are willing to do the work win, not just the people who make an application sound good? Program design features, I mean, I could talk about that for a year. Program design is exactly how intensive, how much work versus training, all of the different pieces of the curriculum, and what specific learnings do you want the entrepreneurs to have when they finish the program. Live virtual versus hybrid. I actually prefer hybrid programs at this point, where you give people a lot of work to do virtually, and the ones who do the work and can be focused and get everything done, they earn the live. But we've run very, very long virtual programs with a lot of success. Okay, so there's 6 different dimensions of acceleration metrics. Once we've defined exactly what the accelerator is going to do, we're going to track the individual, the company, the program, the organization running the program, the industry, and the societal impact. I know that seems like a lot, but if you're bringing people to a physical place, you can actually assess how it impacts the region and the industries of focus of a program. And it's been really, really fascinating to do that. So, for the individual, you want to do a good baseline on education of the participants. So you're tracking new skill sets. I care about leadership dynamics too, and the growth of them being able to manage and lead. Probably the most important thing is, I have a very strict no jerk policy. So if people are jerks, I just don't work with them. It's so nice. So having nice, ethical people who are honest, I don't care how good your company is, if you're not honest and you're not going to be a good partner, then we don't need to let you in our programs. It's really great. We do track some personality dimensions depending on the type of program it is, but you don't want your entrepreneurs to feel like guinea pigs. So as they're applying and as they first get in, you can track all kinds of stuff because the program hasn't really started and they'll do whatever you want. Afterwards, you're really focused on very specific metrics for the company and a few pieces to see what baseline impact there was. So we baseline and we do longitudinal tracking, correlating with the company growth. So if this type of personality or this type of skill set does not lead to company growth, that's a good thing for me to know. Now, does that mean I don't take those people anymore? It depends. If I had a fund, I would probably never take those people again. Because why would I take people who are less likely to have successful exits? But because I'm an educator, I'm going to keep playing with it and figure out how to crack that nut. Okay, so company and products. We spend a lot of time on company investor reporting because that's how we're able to track company data for years. Our software then turns into their investor reporting. It's been awesome. because that means instead of them spending $10,000 a year on their own investor reporting content software, they use ours, everybody wins. The whole idea here is to understand, again, very deeply, how, if they're getting ready for investment at any point in time, even if they never take investment, this is your board of director reporting, right? So revenue, margins per revenue stream, where they're doing well in what geographies, where their margins may be better. How do you create that repeatable business model so when I'm deciding what new geographies to go into, I already have some understanding of, in these type of countries, I do really well because the GDP is this, and they have this many people, and this is how we're gonna roll out. If I don't have that data, people always think I'm gonna go for Brazil or Argentina or wherever. When in reality, you may do very, very well in the Colombia or even the smaller countries because you have the data and understand the societal and economic development pieces to tell the story. We really care about the indirect job creation too, because that gets very interesting. If a company is smart enough to not take in new employees, but can do indirects and outsource different parts of their businesses to stay leaner, great data for us to know. Customer lifetime value, net promoter scores, customer acquisition costs, all the conversion metrics, attribution, etc., burn and run rates. I mean, we literally have probably 700 company level data points that are tracked depending on the type of company and growth. Oh, so this is a snapshot of how you can look at these things, and then you can pull it out and look at the data time-stamped, which has been great. And again, it's for reporting. Product metrics. So at each separate product, you have to track separately. Programmatic metrics, application acceptance rate, revenue growth during program and up to 3 years, mentor satisfaction score, diversity and inclusion, value per employee, mentor hours, investment totals, applicant versus accepted. So those of you doing research, applicant data versus accepted data is super interesting because you can actually stay in touch with companies that were not accepted and see how they did. Fascinating, right? So that's when you start getting into actually true experiments and understanding what you do well. Organization. So an organization may run 2 or 3 different programs at the same time or in a year. How do they change? If a mentor is involved in one and not the other, how does that actually change the way that the programs are run? We've actually found that there are some mentors who actually create better margins for their companies than others. That means I then have that mentor do the group training and make sure we capture that content so people can use it all over the world, not just people who are in a physical program. Revenue margins, core and supplemental revenue, this is a really important one too for programs. Distraction ratios. Because if you're looking for money, you're gonna start saying yes to all kinds of stuff that totally takes you off the focus of what your program's supposed to do. And then we have organization level metrics. And then industry, corporate engagement, brand equity in the industry, API usage, developer community growth, press, societal impact. This has been really fascinating. We're running a 2-country program in Central Asia right now where we are tracking at the country level what the impact is for society in retaining and recruiting the diaspora back to the country for specific industries. That gets really fun if you're nerdy. Okay, that's it. So, I don't know if there's any time for questions. There is?
Ok, buenas. Tenemos un espacio para preguntas a la doctora Susana Amat.
For you, what is the most important variable? Qualitative or quantitative?
I mean, it depends on a million things. But both. But quantitative means I can actually see revenue and all of the pieces and then track it very easily. And I guess it is more important in some ways because if an entrepreneur, they come in with huge projections. I mean, all of them say, okay, we're making $10,000 now, but in a year, we're going to be making $85 million. They all start with that kind of assumption. And then when they actually look at the numbers, there's no getting around it. The rose-colored glasses are gone when you have data and you can say over time, every month, you're growing by 2% and not 40,000% like their projections said. So I'm not someone, and the way we run our programs, we don't say that won't work. We give them education, and then they look at their data, and we're coaching. So there's no way they can lie and tell a big story around when you are having 2% growth. So it's very much about helping them be honest about what's working and not working so that they can make the right decisions for their business. Because I don't want them to be dependent on my team forever. I want them to be leaders and run awesome businesses and become very rich. Yay for capitalism.
How are you?
I'm great, we match. What's up?
I'm from Peru, and there is a lot of minimum persons, and there is a lot of something like you, educational and coaching and that kind of companies. But more of them goes to the big companies. More of them don't look for that very short process, and it's very hard to make that jump there for our, we call MIPES.
Okay, so you're talking about there's lots of micro-entrepreneurs, and there's lots of people who are saying they're doing coaching, but you're not seeing the growth of those companies?
Yes, and we have 73% from those companies, and it's a lot of our economy.
Okay, so what's your exact question? Because unfortunately, I've been spending a lot of time in informal and formal and micro, so...
My question is about how can we do to make the very low process goes to the coachings.
Okay.
They don't like it.
Well, but they don't... Okay, this is a great question. So if I'm a micro-entrepreneur, I'm doing it to survive and feed my family. If I don't see value in going to coaching, I'm not going to go. It's that simple. So one of the big challenges is, number one, coaches need to go where the micro-entrepreneurs are instead of having everybody come to some center and spend 2 or 3 hours, especially daily, in some kind of training. Because these are people who are paying for their family to live, and they're not interested necessarily, or they don't understand what value a coach would bring. But this is on the coach to show value. And so if they're not collecting data and saying, maybe I specialize in textiles. Maybe I'm a coach that specializes in training textile micro-entrepreneurs, okay? If I can't say the average textile company, or not company, micro-entrepreneur comes in and they're making $100 a month of revenue, and I help them get to $200 or $400 a month, then I should not be in business. It's insane how many people say they do entrepreneurship and they have no accountability for the value they're offering. So it really comes down to a coach who is good will have data on the value of spending time with them. Otherwise, the entrepreneurs are smart not to spend time with them, because if you're not offering me value, I'm not going to waste my time. It's that simple. So the program we're doing in Central Asia, 90% of the companies there are micro. And it's not only an issue of micro, it's informal. And we have to work on this huge policy initiative to help them understand why they need to go from informal to formal, and how that coaching is also going to be part of it. So, but to answer your question specifically, if there's no value for the entrepreneur, don't forget, entrepreneurs are all about value creation. It comes in the form of revenue, right? But if I don't see value for my time in going to a coach or being in a program, I'm not going. And if the coaches don't understand how to market themselves and show value, then they don't even know how to sell their product. That's insane that they would think that they should help any entrepreneur. Sorry that I have opinions that are so strong. Okay, what else?
¿De qué manera contribuye la métrica que usted plantea
Yeah.
en relación a la honestidad, en el suministro de los datos, tanto por parte del, digamos, el jefe de la empresa y en relación con los obreros?
What a great question, thank you. Okay, so let's say I'm a boss, right? I'm the CEO of a startup, and I have a co-founder, and I have 3 people that we bring on. This is a really important piece, because most CEOs, especially of startups, all they are focused on is testing and validating what their business is, or they're chasing money. And it's very easy for them to blame people in the team for not getting things done in the way they want. It's very easy. The first thing we do, I don't care if it's an idea stage company or sometimes companies that already have 500,000, $1 million, even several million in revenue, is start from scratch in looking at what metrics they're collecting. And most of them, they kind of have revenue, they know their revenue numbers, but they don't have discipline on the sales process. So they may have, 400 different leads of potential sales, but they're not having a disciplined approach to how to track why sales aren't happening, or how many days to close, or what the terms can be to make sure there's enough cash coming in. So when each member of a team really has accountability of their job and says, here's what I'm accountable for, here are the metrics for my success, which leads into the company's success. And every week you're looking at those metrics, sometimes daily. I mean, on my team, for our software, we have daily metrics we look at for some of our bigger platforms. On one of our platforms, we have 400,000 startups. I want to know daily engagement. I want to know percentage deliverable completion. Like, I need to know those metrics, because we're not doing our job if we have users and nobody's using it. So every person needs to have their own metrics. And then the CEO says, here's my dashboard of you're accountable for sales. You have to bring in, let's say, $20,000 a month of revenue, of new sales, which hopefully will be recurring. If you're not hitting it, there might be things that I'm doing wrong as a CEO to provide you with a new team member, materials. The website may not help you pull in new clients. There could be a lot of things. But if you don't know the way that you're being tracked, and we don't have clarity on attribution of where sales are coming from, etc., I may blame you when it's not your fault. So every person on the team has to have metrics that they feel like they own. They should actually co-develop those metrics with the CEO or with their report, with their direct supervisor, so that they say, you know what, based on this, I think I can do this month. And then when you hit that goal, everybody's happy, and we can all as a team understand the value we all bring. At the end of the day, everybody has to bring value. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Probably in too much detail, but okay. Anything else?